Welcome to the podcast, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time, a CADSource production. You are not alone, and Michael Brody-Waite is joining this podcast to discuss that and more, including his story of addiction, his TED Talk seen by almost 2 million people, and his book, Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts. You can learn more by visiting michaelbrodywaite.com. But for now, we welcome the man himself, Michael Brody-Waite. This episode exists because of CADSource. CADSource is your content team. You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? That's what we do. Content strategy, creation, and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CADSource, we exist to help you create and share amazing content. And yes, you should have a podcast. We'll help you. Learn more by visiting CADScontent.com. You say in your TED Talk that almost 2 million people now have viewed. And by the time someone listens to this, hopefully it'll be over 2 million people, and it should be. And you were starting to tear up, you were getting emotional, and you said, you are not alone. And I think about that in a lot of different perspectives. Obviously, I'm never been an addict, right? But people are always dealing with something. And I just saw a post that you had, and this is really cool, that you just had a son, right? So not that long ago. And I remember I have 3 kids, and my oldest kid is a boy. And I do this a lot. I go inside my own head and I start thinking of things, and like, you're by yourself and how are you going to do this? And it's like this huge ego comes out inside your head and whatever it is. And I remember my wife had signed me up for a class, Daddy Boot Camp. And I said, that sounds ridiculous. I'm not going to that. And it was at the hospital.
My pride and ego immediately reject this.
That's right. Just like, no, we're not doing that. I went, right? I went and I looked around the room and I heard people talking. And I was like, I thought to myself, wow, I am not alone at all in this. This is unbelievable. In fact, there's people here that are like really freaking out about what's about to take place in their life. And so I've come across the you are not alone thing so many times. I mean, when we first started talking, you asked about my wife's shoulder surgery. She wasn't alone. There's other people that have dealt with it. Everyone's got a story. We've been talking a little bit more on the podcast. My wife is diagnosed with celiac disease. She's gone through a lot. 2 of my daughters, they were both diagnosed with celiac disease. So we're talking about those things. And again, you are not alone, whether it's the one that was impacted by it directly or indirectly, like myself or my son. It's now impacting our household. You are not alone. And when I heard you say that and you got emotional, I could feel it. And I say it, and even when I say it right now, I feel like your spine, right? You tingle a little bit. Like, it's real stuff, man. And so first of all, I appreciate you just chatting with us on this podcast, having this conversation. You're all over the place. It's awesome. Your book, it's great. So anyway, I just want to talk about you are not alone. And when you said that on the stage that day, you obviously felt it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I did feel it. And what's crazy is I don't really, when I'm doing public speaking, practice that much. I'm into authenticity, but I had so much that I wanted to say in that TED Talk that I actually practiced. And I'm not sure there was a time where I practiced and I didn't want to say that. And then when I said it, that I didn't tear up.
Oh.
Because like my original vision for the end of my TED Talk was to bring 50 of my friends that are recovering addicts on stage and like say everything I just shared. It's not to say that I'm special. It's what we do. But they told me logistically, like that wasn't practical and like people don't do TED Talks. And so I had to figure out another way because I felt like nobody tapped me into this, but I felt like I was representing a perspective on addiction and recovery. And I was trying to carry the torch for a message that we don't hear a lot about addicts in recovery. We hear the story of the person that got clean and they were successful in spite of their addiction. We don't hear a lot about the person that says, I was successful because of my addiction. And it just felt like it was important to be able to tell the addict that's out there that they're not alone, but also to tell them that like, hey man, this isn't just something that you're going to get over so that you don't F up. Like this is something that's going to be your superpower. And so you have a whole new incentive to get clean. And in the current context with the pandemic, now everybody knows what it's like to be isolated by a disease. And you said it right. Addicts do not have any unique claim on feeling isolated by their challenges. And I think that one of the saddest things in our world right now is we are hyper connected to everybody and we're not connected to anybody.
Yeah. You were going into this thing about, and you had mentioned this on a podcast I heard you on, you said it's still happening. And you just alluded to it in a different way there, that what you're dealing with, what an addict deals with, what anyone's dealing with when they're going through something is there's no end game. You don't hit this final point and you're not dealing with it ever again. Maybe it becomes a superpower, but things are going to come up. Things aren't going to go well, right? Maybe things are going very well. And like you said, something totally outside of your control, a pandemic comes in, well, it's not going so well right now. And what's in the liquor cabinet or whatever issue that someone might have, they're going to deal with it. And you would reference it because a lot of times I feel like we hear people talking about perseverance, these rags to riches stories. And it's like they're still dealing with stuff even after they've succeeded. And we have to figure out a way to manage it, cope with it, understand it, say it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's not always going to be happy. It's not going to be that way. And you're still working through it. And I think that's a super important way to think through this because you're saying it. And this is someone who's gone through and gone to these different dark places. And it's still happening for you as you still go through everything that you go through.
When I met my wife, I think I was 12 years clean. And she was like, "You still go to meetings?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, "I don't want to relapse. I want what I have." I see kind of two different things in what you just said. So like number one, that is, I feel like everybody's addicted to something. And especially these days, when I was growing up, they called marijuana the gateway drug. I can't believe I say it. I sound so old, marijuana. But
Yeah.
they called that the gateway drug. Well, all we're really talking about is something outside of us that can numb our feelings. So in reality, everybody has a gateway drug in their pocket and they're more addicted to it than I ever was to weed. And that's the smartphone or the internet or social media or whatever. Now, I'm not going to go off on like a rant. I'm not Cal Newport, digital minimalism. I'm not going to do all that, even though I like his work. But so I think we are all to some degree reaching for things to medicate our experience as humans. And I think that a lot of us have to go through some level of recovery and it doesn't have to look like a drug addict in a movie. Parallel to that though, like deeper in what you just said in some ways for me is just me pulling out that I was taught in recovery that this is an inside job, that it's not about my parents. It's not about society. It's not about the drugs. It's not about if this had worked out or that had worked out or whatever, that my ability to be content on this earth, to feel peace and to not use is 100% within my control if I focus on the inside job. And so as someone that was one couch away from homeless, I was homeless. I just had a couch, to somebody that's 3-time CEO or whatever, all that bullshit or whatever. But like, I still remember selling my company and buying my dream house. And I knew the day I bought it that within a year, like I wouldn't be high from it anymore, that it wouldn't make me happy. It wouldn't make me content. And I even shot a video saying, "Michael, remember this because you and I both know this isn't going to make you happy." And so I think that there's this level of like self-leadership, leading yourself independent of the external circumstances you find yourself in, so that you can be content with who you are in this world, that actually in effect brings you more of the external things that you desire, as long as you can wear them like the way that we say in recovery, like a loose jacket, or as a Buddhist would say, without attachment.
Sure.
And not to get too philosophical, but like those are like the two things I pulled out of what you just said.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Get philosophical. We're here for it. It's interesting because you talk about masks a lot. And this is before there was a mask mandate or...
it's been a trip.
That's unbelievable that like, wait, who is this guy? How did you get to this point? Because you're like, take the mask off, but you're not talking about the pandemic, right?
No.
You're taking the mask off in a completely different way. But it's fascinating that here we are and the word mask just has completely almost new meaning totally.
Dude, it's so funny you say that. So like, because I have so many people, I've been doing this work for years now. And so my book came out in May. So we literally hit the pre-promotion window the first week of March. So I'm about to have a call with my PR firm about like all the PR we're about to do. And I come out of one of my 12-step meetings and I see that the NBA season's been suspended and it gets real for me. And I get on the phone with my PR team and they're like, all that PR that you were going to get is gone. The election's going to be lucky to get covered. And then we had to have this debate on your whole thing is living and leading mask free. We're going to have to stop talking about that. And I had to actually ask myself, like, am I being too stubborn wanting to continue to talk about it? And I ended up going a separate path for my PR firm because I was like, I have to be authentic to myself And I even got like a death threat on Facebook. Someone's like, "You're killing people, man." But what was really cool is I said, "No, man, I'm talking about the mask that people have been wearing for centuries and that they'll wear for centuries. From now, I'm talking about being authentic." He's like, "Oh, that's cool." Like he went from like threatening me to like, "Oh, that's cool." And it all goes back to, so I have 18 years clean. My clean date, September 1st, 2002. And when I got into rehab in that September, they gave me 2 paper masks. Okay. So this is 18 years ago, well before coronavirus.
Yeah.
And they gave me a bunch of magazines. They gave all this stuff. It wasn't just me. And they said, cut out images and words on one mask that represent who you want the world to see you as, and cut out images and words on the other for who you see yourself as. And I mean, dude, it was as contrasting as light and dark. I mean, it was just crazy. It was like I had pictures of incredibly fit athletes and money and cars and all these things. And then just these really sad images, pathetic images in how I felt. And that's when I realized that I was wearing a mask my whole life. I've been hiding my true self. And so it didn't immediately become my mission. But at some point when I was so successful in business, not with an MBA, but with a PhD in 12-step recovery, it was like, it became my mission to say, you know what? Addicts aren't the only people that want to take their mask off. Other people do too.
Yeah. And then you show up. Again, you talked about this in the podcast as well, but it fits in with what you're talking about because you showed up on the stage at TED Talk wearing flip-flops. And you had talked about how, I think it was your wife, right? Said, you can't do that. People are saying, what are you doing? Like, no one does that. No one does all these things and you're pushing these limits, but it's like, this is just who you are. And you're not going to apologize for it. And maybe there was a time when you would have apologized for it, or you would have gone somewhere else with it, some darker place, and tried to pretend that you're something that you're not, and that you're out there doing it. And I think it relates, it's different, right? Because that's just standing out, it's putting yourself out there. But I also see it a lot now with, like you mentioned, the election or whatever it is. There's opinions that are assigned to people. And that's super frustrating, right? Because you must feel this way about something. And perhaps it's because of the mask that you wear. I don't know. I don't know how to correlate the two. But I think there's that as well. And that leads to, and the person themselves might not even really, they haven't even gotten introspective on it to know that what is their true opinion on this, as opposed to the opinion being assigned to them. And there's so much happening in there, and it can be frustrating for people. And I think it can create anger. It can create people just to, you know what, I'm just not going to say anything at all. Did you see that? Do you see where I'm kind of going with that?
Yeah. And one thing that you said, how you get assigned and then you're scared of what people will think. I think it's really important for us to understand that in the last 25 years, everything around how we interact has completely changed. And, you know, I'm not a professor, but like, just here's some street addict logic for you. We are more connected through technology than we've ever been, and less connected prior to the pandemic with the people in our lives than we've ever been, right? Nuclear families are blown up. We don't have the village anymore, all that kind of stuff. So the problem is that human beings are scared of 2 deaths. We're scared of physical death and social death. And when you really think of it, they're combined, because on our own, like a tiger would kick our ass. Like we're not beating a tiger. It's going to kick our ass. So we have to work together. So you have to be part of a tribe in order to survive. That's how humans become an apex predator while being some of the physically most weak beings in the world. So if we don't have a tribe that we are completely tight with, the whole world potentially becomes our tribe. And with digital interaction through social media and internet, suddenly a negative comment can threaten my safety. And so as proud as I was of my TED Talk, and say as grateful as I was that it went viral and that people responded to it, all it took was one negative comment for me to kind of go through a downward spiral a little bit. People love the flip-flops, but all it took was one guy going, "What a D-bag wearing flip-flops." And I'm like, "Oh, shouldn't have worn the flip." My wife was right. And there's like 20 more comments that say that they think that's awesome. I want to tell you that I don't look at this stuff, but I do. Mm-hmm. The most liked comment was like, "You can tell this man's authentic. He's wearing flip-flops." And it's got like, I don't know, it had like 3,000 likes or something like that. But I'm paying attention to some dude that's hiding behind a computer saying he shouldn't have worn flip-flops. Eventually, I stopped paying attention to it. But I just think that we have more hostile threats to our authentic selves than we've ever had, because we don't have the reinforcement of those tight nuclear family kind of reinforcing bonds of like, be you, be your unique self, all that kind of stuff. But we have access to literally the entire world's level of criticism. And so it's really hard to counteract that voice that says, you're not allowed to have a unique perspective.
Yeah. It's super vulnerable because you just admitted that, hey, I look at these comments.
Oh, I totally want to be the guy. It's like, I don't look at them, but I do.
Yeah. And of course, it takes a while, right, to build that up. And kids are dealing with it. I mean, you have a son now, right? I mean, he's going to go to school. There's going to be bullies. There's going to be haters. There's going to be times when the people are not even trying. They're just a comment in passing can lead to someone feeling really bad about themselves. And how do they handle it? I mean, it's every single day. I have 3 kids, right? You see it constantly. That vulnerability is super important to then be able to talk about it, right? Because, and I don't know what the studies are, and we can go find one, but for every bad comment, you need like 10 good comments to feel a little bit better. And that's just unbelievable that just one bad comment in passing could just send you off the rails. And who knows where that person's even coming from and what they're dealing with, right? And it's significant. And again, going back to that, you had that line, it's still happening. And you're living through that right now. You had to go to a place though, and you had to go to hear Jordan Peterson talk. He talks a lot about the belly of the beast, and you talk about the movie Pinocchio, right? He had to go down to the belly of the beast. You had to go to these dark places. And it's something I'm always fascinated by because I don't think anyone's just made perfect decisions along their path. They had to go back, and maybe they weren't bad decisions in the past, but they're still living through it. You are who you are today because of all that you went through. And obviously you probably felt like you wronged people or did some things that you obviously would never have wanted to do. But did you had to go there to be who you are today?
100%.
Like, how do you look at that? Yeah.
So 100%. And one of the things that I do is I can live in the philosophical realm, but the philosophy of, hey man, you should just not use drugs didn't get me clean. I need philosophy to be backed up by practical, tactical execution that's effortless, right? And that's why I love a 12-step program and it changed my life. And so when people say everything that you did prepares you for this moment, and so you should be grateful for everything that happened, like that sounds really good. But if you've done some heinous stuff in your life, if you have some incredible shame over who you've been or the way you've acted or what you've done, that doesn't really carry the water. It doesn't. And so for me, I had to actually like use my principles and use my program in recovery and say, okay, so like, what do I really mean when I say I'm glad that I'm an addict? And so like I had to go back and actually think about it and break it down into something that's practical that can tell every addict in this world that they are a fucking superpower and just waiting to happen. And it was me being able to isolate 2 things. And so before I tell you the 2 things, when I go and I speak to companies or whatever, one of the things I'll tell them is the best thing about me is that I'm an addict. And when I say that, I'm not saying that I'm grateful for my recovery. When I'm doing my gratitude in the morning and I'm talking to my higher power, I tell him that I'm grateful for my disease of addiction before I ever start talking to him about my recovery. And that's because my addiction gave me 2 things that most people don't have. Number 1, it gave me incentive. I walk around, even to this day with 18 years clean, with a loaded gun pointed at my head that says, if you don't practice the principles that I talk about in my TED Talk or in my book or that I was taught in recovery, if I don't practice those principles, I die. And as a result, I have a greater incentive than the average leader to practice rigorous authenticity, to surrender the outcome, and to do uncomfortable work. I have to, or I die. Number 2, because that incentive is an incentive that largely at least half of our world is impacted by. Most people are impacted by addiction. There's a lot of really great resources and communities out there. And so for me as an addict, I can go to a 12-step meeting anywhere in the world, especially now with Zoom. I can literally go like anywhere. And for the price of 1 hour of my time and a really shitty cup of coffee, I can be around people that are literally like in a boot camp for training on how to use these principles. I can get my 10,000 hours practicing these the way a Navy SEAL prepares for battle, all with people that share the same incentive. And so as a result, I have a place to learn and I have the incentive to go there in a way that most people don't have. And so when I coach people that aren't addicts, I usually have to find, which is where we started, the things that are like addiction for them, that they may not have my dark story, but everybody's got that part of them that they think is the worst thing about them. And these 3 principles are about answering the question, what if the worst thing about you could become the best thing about you? And I have the incentive and the opportunity to use the principles to make that happen. And as a result, I had to make amends. I had to own all the things that I did. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade any of it.
You obviously develop these habits, right? To be able to attend an event, right? To go to a 12-step event in anywhere, whether it's local or virtually, and then to wake up and to practice gratitude, to do these things. These are consistent habits over and over and over again to where it probably just happens for you now, where you almost don't even think about it, right? Which is what the habit is. Have you seen that play out across everything that you're doing now? These habits that you've developed, whether it's exercising, you have a book, right? Writing that book. You have to have this incredible habit. You can't maybe you can write 300 words, but how are you going to do 300 words every single day at the same exact time to build it up so it's 300 pages, let's say?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, it is habit. It's muscle memory. And I think so many people want to go to a workshop or a speaking event or watch a podcast, get inspired and expect implementation to happen even when novelty is gone. And that's not how it happens. It's going into the gym and doing the bicep curls again. It's the virtual equivalent of that. And so what inspired me to write my book was I'm building this company. I've got 50 employees. I'm very open about being a recovering addict. Everyone knows my story. And I run into Brene Brown's work. If it isn't obvious, I totally worship the ground. And I say this on every podcast, if I ever meet her, I will pee on myself. It will happen. And so if you can make that happen, you'll get to see me in an embarrassing moment. And so I gave everybody that worked for me her books. And the problem, I was at like breakfast with one of my employees, Julie, and I was like, why aren't you executing what's in this book? And she said, I don't have what you have. It's harder for me to integrate this stuff into my habits. And that was what made me come up with all this stuff, because I realized that the 12-step program is the greatest behavior modification program in the history of the world. I mean, think about this for a second. In my book, I talk about how leaders do 4 things that are terrible. They say yes when they could say no. They hide weaknesses. They avoid difficult conversations, and they hold back their unique perspective. And there isn't one leader on this earth that could look me in the eye and say, I haven't done any of those in 10,000 days. But I could line up hundreds of addicts that used to shoot heroin every single day that haven't shot heroin in 10,000 days in a row. And so we are the masters as recovering addicts of integrating, identifying our character defects, the things that make us want to use, the things that make us a bad person. And we have a process to create a habit around changing them and acting differently. And so all I did differently than my employee was I integrated what I learned around authenticity and leadership from Brene Brown into my 12-step program. And it specifically is designed to change and create your habits. And when I did that, I realized that I was like onto something. But yes, so I use this system. Last month, it was I discount my speaking fees and stuff out of fear, right? So I had to work my 28-day mask-free action card on my propensity to undervalue myself. And I found out that a member of my team feels like the work that we do isn't as valuable when I discount. So I didn't even know if that was happening. And so I had to go through a specific process to creating the habit. And my goal, my charge for the month was to collect 4 moments. I did 5 times to collect 4 moments where I quote my price and I get butterflies. Literally identifying a specific behavior that I need to execute and change, and then giving me a system that allows me to rewire my brain to create muscle memory so that I can do it repeatedly.
So you're comfortable doing it?
Well, no, I'm not comfortable.
Do you get comfortable? Like, do you then get comfortable? Then you got to like, oh, I'm too comfortable and I got to get to that. Not comfortable in your everyday stuff, but like getting to that point, to that question. Like, and if you feel yourself getting comfortable, does that when you say, all right, go to the next one?
So I asked someone, I said, I'm a public speaker. And I was like, do you get nervous? And I've had a couple people like, no, I love it. And then someone's like, yeah, I get nervous every time. And then I remember like seeing like an athlete, I forgot who that I loved. And they're like, do you get nervous? They're like, yes, I get nervous every time. And I realized that if you can get comfortable with the discomfort, which is why it's a yes and no, then it doesn't affect you. And so if you make doing uncomfortable work part of your ethos, you get comfortable doing uncomfortable work. So when I get to that moment where I have to quote, I feel the stress in my stomach. I feel the butterflies. My heart starts racing, but I'm able to go, you know what? I'm not going to let any of that stop me. I'm comfortable overcoming this, surrendering this, and I'm able to execute anyway. And so in that way, I become comfortable.
Okay. I was going to ask you too, like uncomfortable work. What is it? Like for you, it's different for everybody. Like having a podcast at the very beginning, it'd be like, get really nervous who I'm going to talk to and what I'm going to say and how is it going to go? I'm going to have a conversation with you. I get anxious about that. that's just the way it is. And I try to prepare, have my routine, do what I do. And so I go into it and I actually enjoy the process of it. But it doesn't mean you're not, like you're saying, not nervous. But what is uncomfortable work? Is it different for everybody? Is it some people can just say whatever the price is and that's not a big deal for them? But there's something else. There's something there that is going to be uncomfortable. And it's finding out what that is and then attacking it or working on it or what.
So all those are really good points. And I love that you shared that you got nervous. Like that's you being authentic. And I love it, dude. So here's the competitive advantage when you break it down. Why I say great leaders live like drug addicts. Recovering addicts are amazing at practicing rigorous authenticity, like I talk about in my book and my TED Talk, right? But just to dig into that, I'm not talking about the buzzy authenticity, right? Like anybody can keep it real in front of grandma. Okay. Everybody can check the box on the one vulnerable thing I'm willing to share with everybody and then hold back all the other shit. Rigorous authenticity is like that moment that I talk about where I went to that job interview and I tell them I'm an addict, even though I need the job, right? Like that's rigorous. So number one, are you able to identify? So some people are good at saying no and terrible at having difficult conversations. Some people are good at sharing their unique perspective, terrible at sharing their weaknesses. So can you identify which of these 4 masks that I talk about are the ones that are holding you back in a situation? Because I've assessed 2,000 leaders, 90% say that they're wearing a mask at least 10 hours a week. And it's costing them 10 hours of productivity a week. Like everybody's freaking do it. It is an addiction. It's an epidemic that's bigger than alcohol and drugs. And I'm on a mission to solve it. But the question is, can you identify where you're wearing your mask? And then the reason that we wear them, the reason that we say yes when we could say no, the reason we hide that weakness, the reason we don't have the difficult conversation, the reason we hold back the unique perspective is we're scared of what people will think. So can you surrender the outcome of what happens when you express yourself and you're true? And if you're able to do that, what happens is you get clarity around your growth edge when you identify your mask. You regain a tremendous amount of energy when you let go of outcomes, like what's going to happen if this happens or whatever. And that means you get to do a disproportionate amount of uncomfortable work. And that's answering your question. And uncomfortable work is not physical and it's not intellectual. It's emotional. It's a sensation in your body that stops you from taking action that's good for you. We've all seen a leader do 8 hours of hard work, avoiding 5 minutes of uncomfortable work. Top 2, performance management of employees and customer negotiations. How many times have we seen someone that's really hardworking and smart walk away from that uncomfortable work or avoid it? Well, usually it's because they haven't identified the mask that they're wearing and they haven't surrendered the outcomes so they can summon the energy that's necessary to actually do that uncomfortable work. And if you can make that your habit, if you can make identifying your mask, surrendering outcomes and doing uncomfortable work your habit, shit, you can go from addict to CEO.
Yeah. Well, it's taking the time too. I would imagine me sitting down with my therapist, going to these places and walking away from the work, whatever it is, like the daily work, right? To explore these things. There's no transaction that's happening there, right? You're actually spending money. You're losing money in that regards. But you can't put the value on it if you really take it serious.
You're optimizing the engine that drives all the other activity. And if you lead more than one person, that's exponential in nature.
Right. How much convincing, because I hear you talking and so I was saying before, like, how much convincing did you have to, maybe it was yourself or some other people seed this into you as well, like that your addiction is a superpower? Because people could say that, like, we have a marketing company, right? That's a really good marketing message. Let's use that and let's explore that. And then no, this is real. Like I can hear it in anything that I've seen that you've put out, whether it's a short video, a LinkedIn post, your book, TED Talk, our conversation. You are convinced that your addiction is your superpower, and not even convinced, like that's a fact. How long did that take for you? Because I would imagine when you realize that, and maybe there wasn't like this moment, this special moment, like, oh my God, here we go. But that changed everything for you.
That's a great question. What I would say is no one told me this, and it didn't come in one moment. And the reason I'm so passionate sharing it is because I think it's something that's lacking in the recovery community. And it's something that's lacking in those that are affected by addiction. And so what happened is in recovery, we do say like, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. We say that. We say, man, I'm so grateful I'm an addict. Like we do that. But what I experienced 2 things at the same time. Number one, I go to a 12-step program that isn't the traditional one that everybody talks about in AA. And my 12-step fellowship is largely blue collar, which is something that I love because it's just very down to earth people. And so as I started to build my career in a white collar job in corporate America, I started to have a slightly different experience in some ways. And I'm not unique. There's plenty of addicts that are in white collar jobs. But what I heard from my friends was, without meaning to, they said, take a mask off, but put a mask on. They said, come into this room and take your mask off and show us who you truly are. But when we go out there, we have to be anonymous. And for a lot of us, it's the fear of the stigma of addiction. And so what happened was, I was just very fortunate that my first sponsor was extremely open, like ridiculously open about his addiction and his recovery. The way I met him was he was doing a workshop at a convention with his wife next to him, talking about staying clean and living dirty and how he was bisexual and had been like sleeping with men. Like, he was so open about his trials and tribulations, his recovery. I was like, I want that fearlessness. And so I was just raised by that dude. So I've always been really open to my recovery. So I say all this because as I start climbing up the white collar ranks, I start having this belief that, man, my addiction's going to like totally knock me off. Like, I'm screwed. But then 8 years in corporate America and these 3 principles became my competitive advantage and got me promoted 8 times in 8 years. So then I found a company, right? And I start that. And I think that being open about my recovery and all this stuff is going to hold me back. And it turns out that by using the principles that I learned in recovery, we created what I call a mask-free culture. And we went up against companies with 150 million venture capital and we waxed them because of these principles. And so in that experience, I continued to start to mentor and sponsor other addicts that would be applying for jobs that would say, okay, I know that in my life, I have to be authentic and I know I have to be real, but in the working world, I don't get to set the rules of engagement there. So I have to hide myself there. So they'd be like, hey, what do I tell my boss in this situation? I'd be like, well, what do you think the situation is? Be like, I think he's wrong. So I'd be like, so tell him he's wrong. Like, I can't do that. Or I'm scared that he'll have a problem with me being an addict. I'm like, tell him you're an addict. And what I realized was, over time, no one was telling addicts this is a superpower, both in the program and also in the real world. I would get, oh, I can't believe you're successful in spite of your addiction. And it started to piss me off more and more, because as I got more successful and I started to zero in, even the TED Talk, right? I didn't know it would go viral. I practiced my principles by wearing those flip-flops and doing the thing, and it was successful. So it's like, the more success I had practicing these principles, the more pissed off I got at my friends in recovery saying, man, it's a double standard out there. You can't be successful. Just talking about this thing that's a stigma. And then having other people say, man, I can't believe you've been successful in spite of this thing, when all I want to scream to everybody is, this thing is the reason that I'm fucking successful. And I'm not unique. Like, I'm not unique. I'm not special, dude. This is accessible to everybody. So like, do it. You just got to walk through some serious fear. So obviously I'm passionate about it. And so now I'm trying to carry that torch, because Superman was born the way that he was. I'm not even a comic book like junkie. I did it in my TED Talk a little bit, but Wolverine was born the way he was, and addicts are born the way that they are. But the ability to turn the worst thing about you into the best thing about you using these principles is available to anyone. And it can become a superpower, because we're all walking around hiding behind a mask, scared that people will see our humanity. And then when they do, we feel incredible connection if they share theirs too. And then we go, well, this can't be successful in a service economy. And that's absolute bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry, diatribe.
No, please. I mean, like I said before, it's a fact of the way it is that this is a superpower. It's not even a question. It's completely convinced. And it makes me think of the Ryan Holiday book, The Obstacle is the Way. You run into this problem, and that is the way. It's right through it. I mentioned before, my wife has celiac disease. She's getting her master's in applied nutrition. Like, she's doing so much with it. Like, we all go to her and be like, what should we be eating? Right? Like, what's the path to go down? Because she's lived it, she's living it, and she's attacking it. And there's so many different examples that we can present of that and what you're talking about. And they're different, right? But like you said before, everyone has a different story with it. And the conversations around it with your friends and people that you work with, they have to continue to happen. And you talked about that too, because you said these conversations aren't clean. That difficult conversation, or just this conversation. Like, I got notes just everywhere here. Like, this isn't clean, but I had to eventually go there to realize there isn't some laundry list like that last question I asked you. Didn't have it planned. I want to go in the direction it's going to go and understand this isn't clean. I'm going to get off it. I could have gone in many different directions, but that's what's cool about it. Maybe we can reconnect, and to allow that to be okay. the conversation isn't going to be clean, whether it's the difficult conversation that we have to have, and I had it planned, it was going to go like this, and we got off the beaten path. That's okay. The other person has to accept that, I think. I think that's very important, that you have to be talking to the right person, that not exactly the right person, but someone who's going to be okay with that. And that might take time to build that relationship, to understand that where you're coming from. But these conversations aren't going to be clean. And you're having a lot of conversations on the podcast, and you're sharing a lot of messages. Like you said before, you get a TED Talk. That's a message that you're putting out there. It's not going to come off exactly how you had it planned. Your book, I'm sure you go back there and you might want to change some pages because things are going to change with it. And here you are, though, continuing to share one, and I say it, one piece of content at a time, your book, your podcast that you're on. Why are you so excited or willing to go out and share your story in different ways, like a podcast like this? Because you've go search your name, Michael Brody-Waite, on Apple Podcasts. You are on a lot of podcasts, and every conversation is going to be different. Why are you doing all this?
It's a great question. After I sold my company, I was very fortunate that I could take some years off if I wanted to and all that kind of stuff. And I hate saying that, but I didn't know what to do with my free time. I went to Home Depot, and I'm not handy like 3 times a day. And I like invented problems, and then that just created more problems. But I remember telling my best friend, Toby, I just want to do what God's will is for me. And, I'm not a religious guy, but I'm a spiritual guy. And I want to take these blessings and do whatever the next right thing is. And I don't want to be one of those people that like, and you've seen them too, that like are saying, oh, I'm just trying to be good for people. But really it's like in service to their legacy or their ego or like something else. And so he was like, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I feel really called to serve at the intersection of leadership and addiction recovery. I don't know what that looks like. And I kept saying, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he was just like, have you asked God what you're supposed to do? And I was like, no. And so in my meditation the next day, I just kept saying like, your will, your will, your will, your will. And that really, without going into all the details, literally the next day I got a call that started me on this path of like sharing this message. And I think that the people that I trust the most when they answer a question like yours is that they don't have a fucking answer because it's all that they're supposed to do. I don't know 100% why I am this focused on it, except, and I don't want to say it this way because I feel like it should be more profound and selfless. I feel like I discovered a secret. And like the fucking movie, The Secret, like I believe in positive thinking and all that stuff. But like, you just have to think about a Ferrari and it'll show up or whatever. Like, I truly believe that I have discovered, and I'm not alone, a secret to how you can lead yourself professionally and personally. And I think that we are living in a world where everybody is committed to denying our humanity to show how perfect we are. And therefore, we're all starving to see each other's humanity. So therefore, we rally around authenticity. And nobody's been able to tie that. What really pissed me off was Brene Brown's work, and it's getting more traction now, was not taken very seriously in the traditional leadership sectors because nobody could tie authenticity to the bottom line. And my work is about taking the fact that a capitalist economy in the US breeds the next generations of leadership. If I can tie what I learned in recovery and being an authentic leader as an entrepreneur to a business's financial performance to make it their incentive, then I can actually revolutionize the rules of leadership. But I don't want to do it. I want to do it the way that Bill Wilson did AA. I want to codify a system that allows people to help each other do it and then slowly slink into the background because I don't want it to be a cult of personality in the process.
I think that's awesome, man, because you like talking about discovering the secret and actually admitting, I don't know why I do this. Like, there's something there and you said you discovered. I would actually probably say you're discovering too at the same time. Like you continue to discover. And that's one of the reasons why I do this. I'm just excited to chat with people like yourself. I want to explore. I want to discover. I don't have these ultimate, like, here's what's going to happen with it. I don't know what's going to happen.
This isn't going into a funnel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's so funny too, because you've brought up social media a few different times and you go on your LinkedIn page and I was laughing because I'd say the same thing. I'll send it to people in my company. If I went in right now, and I actually got one good message in LinkedIn in my direct message the other day. So I'll take that one out, but we'll put it in there. Of the last 10 LinkedIn messages I got, 8 or 9 of them were all spam or they didn't spend 2 seconds to look at it. And you're out there talking about those things. Like, what is this funnel? What is this thing? Like, where is this? It's weird too, because you use the word authentic And that sometimes can be overused, right? Or not sometimes, it's very often overused. But just because it's overused, it doesn't mean that you can't use it and you can't use it in a good way.
Right. Well, that's also why I say rigorous authenticity, because selective and curated authenticity are really easy. It just takes one post to be authentic. But I'm authentic. Like, are you authentic all the time?
Right. Well, someone could say, well, you're on these podcasts because you want to sell your book. And here's what I would say. I don't know if this is true. Of course you do, because you believe there's a really great message in there. And that's okay that people are going to buy your book as a result of that. I'm there for it. I'm saying like, there's ways to poke holes in all of it. And that's just the way people are thinking, because they're always going to find a way to hate. They're going to say, I don't like Jeff Bezos because he built an addition to his home. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not here for that type of stuff. I'm more fascinated by what he's building.
Anyone that thinks that someone's on a podcast to sell their book doesn't understand the economics of the book industry right now.
Right.
I'm on a mission to have people read my book. That's why before it launched, I put it up for free on digital. But like, do I have a selfish motive? So here's my selfish motive. I want my platform to have enough revenue that I can pay my employees and cover my expenses. So this is what I do the rest of my life. I think anybody that says that they don't have any selfish motive is ignoring how humans are driven. Even when you do something nice for someone, you're being selfish because you like the feeling. Like you're manipulating your biochemistry when you take that action. So like we really want to put everybody into these really clean buckets. Like you're either awesome or you suck and all that kind of stuff. And there's like just so much fruitful, awesome humanity in the middle and being gray. And that's why, like for me, I have to continue to work my 12-step program, my Mass Free program, because I remember doing social media videos and my wife going, stop, you're not being authentic. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm Mr. Authenticity here.
Yeah.
And I totally believe what I'm saying. And she was like, when you are truly trying to impact a human, you get jazzed talking to one person at a time because you need to have that intimacy. She's like, when you're talking to a bunch of people, you're performing. I know inside your brain right now, because I've been with you so long, that you just did that video talking to the masses instead of thinking about, and she named like a person that was in a specific similar situation. And yeah, like, you know, I'd heard you got to pick your avatar and all that crap or whatever, but like I try to ignore all that stuff. And I was like, God, you're right. And so one of the things that people say is like, how do you know who your true self is? And how do you know when you're being authentic? And the truth is that I don't think anyone knows. It's easier to spot when I'm being inauthentic than to spot when I'm being authentic. And so like I came on the podcast and initially like it was part of a book tour. We sold, I don't know, like 1,000 books. Like the book is not the end game and the coaching program is not the end game. The end game is 1 million leaders, part of an authentic leader society that literally change how we lead. And the truth is, I'm willing to sit here and admit that that may never happen. That like I have this grandiose BHAG, right? Like you're supposed to have as an entrepreneur. And I'm okay saying, you know what, it might never happen. I just don't want to die not taking my shot. And if I impact like a couple people along the way, I got lost when I wrote the book for what it's worth. I invested in the book and I said, I'm going to take what I sold, you know, my company and do these things. And one of it is I'm going to write this book. And if I just help one addict or one leader, I'm good. And then somewhere along the way, when people started going, wow, this is really cool. And I hired a PR company, I started wanting to be on Oprah to carry my message. And then I'm like, oh my God, Oprah's not going to notice me. I'm like, how the fuck did I go from I want to help one addict to I want to be on Oprah? Like, what the hell happened? And the pandemic was the biggest blessing in the world because it ruined my book launch. Emancipated me from like something I had enslaved myself to, which was I need to have massive impact now. And I was able to get back to what I am, which is a bootstrap entrepreneur who's purpose driven, not money driven. And I just started like hosting a Monday night Mask Free Society meeting on Zoom, 6 p.m. on Monday, still have it every week. And it was so rewarding. And frankly, right now, I still don't know how we're going to get to break even. I have a plan for it, but I don't know for sure how we're going to get there and sustain it. And it's all a big gamble. But like, I just can't live in the problem. I got to live in the solution. And one of the things that they told me when I got into the rooms of recovery is they said, if you stick around long enough, we will F up your using. I was like, what do you mean by that? Like, well, once we tell you that you can stay clean and we tell you these concepts, you won't be able to see using the same way. So my goal with carrying this message with the book and the stuff that I do is I want to F up people's leadership. And I want them to never be able to see it the same. I want them to know that you can be a truly rigorously authentic human that surrenders and does uncomfortable work, and that you can be successful anyway.
Well, you've proven that you're open to change, obviously, and you're trying to help other people be open to change. I love that your wife is your truth teller, that she just called you out. I have the same thing at my house. And it's just like, what are you talking about? I think that's awesome. And you talked about too, because I'll ask you this and I want to say something, but do you think business leaders should be creating content? Should they be on podcasts? Should be writing books, blogs, whatever, sharing social media posts? And not necessarily like where they are on vacation. I'm not talking about that BS. I'm talking about like real, like you said, try to be authentic. I always talk about it's just like this path to better content. You might start off talking about your company and how great it is and the bells and whistles, but maybe that's just what you need. Just start writing that down and then go and go and go and tell these stories. And that's what we've done with business leaders. And they would talk about how great their company is and why you should work for that company. And then they started telling the story about when they were a bartender and two guys walked in, they were like, oh, wow, who are these guys? I want to talk to them. And there's a story in there. They're in the music industry. And it's like, those are the stories that people want to hear, not this other stuff. They don't care about that. That's almost like assumed stuff. But I would also see that in content. And when you put this book out, when you appear on these podcasts, there's incredible accountability to yourself. Because if you say these things, if you talk about this on the podcast, if you put out a TED Talk and you act completely different in different worlds, then it is bullshit, right? And it has to be consistent, right? So I always say like, well, if I can hear your talk, hear you on a podcast, read your book, see a blog, whatever it is that that person has or whatever you have, and there's consistency in that messaging, and I talk to you and then we have a conversation, it's like, well, everything you've said up until now is completely on point with what you're saying today. Well, now that's incredible, like consistency. And then there's leverage in that because you have a book. And if Oprah does call you up, well, maybe the book is what led to that conversation. You're just not trying to live for that outcome anymore. You caught yourself in it. But this podcast is leverage. It's authentic because I want to have conversations with people like yourself. So that is leverage. You having a book is leverage to get on someone's podcast. It's just when you use it disingenuously that it gets lost. And I get it. People are doing it. And there's things that we want to create. And we want to work with people and help them with their content marketing. And you want people to work for you or find your book or whatever those things are. And I'll go back to the first thing that I asked that I went down my little rant.
I liked your rant.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think business leaders should be creating content today?
I think that it would be arrogant for me to say what I think all business leaders should do.
To the right person, and I want to interrupt that, just for the person that is considering it, that wants to go down this path, should they? Because it's not everybody, right?
Man,
that's, of course.
You may not like my answer.
That's okay.
So I'm going to do what a sponsor does. Instead of like giving advice, they usually share experience. So here's my experience. I was never that into social media because it empowered my ego too much. And I just didn't like that. So when I was building my company and Quicker for a period of time, I started noticing that all I was doing was saying how awesome we were. And so I got off of it. And so when I started preparing to do this career and the book and all that kind of stuff, everybody's like, well, the model is you got to have social media. And so we figured out, okay, we did it terribly. And then we got more professional and then we got arguably decent at it. And we started creating content. And I think that everything you said about authentic content, that's the key in my experience. And maybe not even just in my experience, but in my observation. And also what you said about surrendering the outcome basically is you got to stop worrying about whether people like it or not. Because the thing is that humans connect with humanity. And so if we try to curate humanity and say, oh, I'm only awesome because I'm at this ice cream store and I'm not going to tell you about like this health condition or whatever, and you offer a curated version of yourself where you're trying to impress people, I think that people are less impressed because there's just so much noise out there doing that. And we're desperate for human connection. But when people tell that story, right, where they can see themselves in your shoes and they can relate, they can't relate to a superhero. That's why we worship superheroes. They can relate to a human. I think it's more effective. Now, what I will tell you is, and you caught me at the wrong time on this or the right time, is I stopped posting after I had my son because I want to practice what I preach and go on paternity leave. Well, while I've been on paternity leave, I've started to ask myself if I'm actually being authentic by doing social media content, because my passion is not creating content. In fact, I don't really enjoy it at all. The thing I enjoy and what everybody on my team used to always try to get me back to, after my 12-step meeting on Wednesday and Friday nights, I would find myself on the steps of the church where we have that meeting, talking to addicts, either with more clean time than me, same clean time with me, or newcomers. And I'd find myself in a one-on-one discussion where I was trying to help somebody or trying to be helped. And I've started to architect everything I'm doing around those moments, enabling those moments. And so all my content for a while was like, thanks to the pandemic, recorded versions of me doing that. But now I have enough people in the Mastery program, the energy I'm putting into putting out social media content at the top of the funnel is detracting from the content that I could create that could serve the people that are actually asking to be impacted. So for example, a 10-minute coherent, clear coaching video using the process that I teach them to solve a problem versus a top of the funnel type of video. And granted, they can be the same thing and they can be sliced up and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I turned to my director of operations, Brooke, I said, I really just don't want to do social media. I just want to help people. And she's like, well, that's actually pretty on brand for us. And so I used to have a vision of a world where we stopped consuming free content. And so like now you have all the paywall content, but like
Sure.
where people will pay for quality and curation in a very noisy world. But I want to architect a reality for our mission where we just serve the people that are currently in our program and let them be our growth engine and point all the content towards them. And because we have their attention, we can do more. Like instead of these quick bites, low calorie type of things that we're doing at the top of the funnel, that's all designed to get to the lead magnet and all this kind of shit or whatever. We have that going. It's not bad. It's just, it's taking away from my desire to build things that help the people that are in the program. And so I want to make the bet that maybe we'll post something once a week and maybe it'll be like it'll violate all the social media norms and we'll be cool with it just so we're carrying our message. But I really want to get out of the free content game, not because I want to get paid for the content, but because I want to spend my time on the people that are going to actually take it and not focus on inspiration, but focus on implementation.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of long form, right?
Yeah.
This conversation being an hour plus long. Yeah. And it's funny too, because you went down to like this internal piece. Because I always said it like, if we had a conversation and no one listens to this, but a few people in the company, that's for them. That's our training manual. Or if it's someone that eventually does want to work here, well, go listen to our podcast and tell us if you want to work here or not. Like, this is who we are. Like this is a consistent messaging. And I think that's a key component. And I don't look at content, and I think it's important to go down this too, is social media is a tool. That's all I see it as. And it's an incredible tool in some ways, and it's a disastrous tool in many other ways, right? Like go watch the documentary on Netflix about it.
Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma, thank you. So it's just a tool that we can connect with other people that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to connect with. But you have to be very careful of who you allow in your feed. But even if you protect your feed, it'll still enter in your feed. If you go to Twitter, you're going to get caught up. There's going to be a post about the election. There's going to be a post about something that drives you nuts. And so you have to figure out a way to connect it or to control it. Journaling, I believe, is content. Internal emails is content. That's when I realized, I'm like, when I wasn't creating content, I was like, I'm writing emails to people. They're pretty long. That could be a thought that could lead to a blog post of me sharing, of me trying to become authentic, of trying to go down this path. Not to say that it is, you're just trying to do it. There's a client we were working with and he said, I don't have anything. I was like, are you really? Go home this weekend and just like look around or think. And he discovered all these internal memos that he had written by hand. And they're not even memos, they're just like notes to people. And this was like these notes that became stuff that he could share with other people in his company. Maybe his assistant had seen it, but other people in his company hadn't seen it. I believe you build this library of content. It's an asset to you to use however you want to use it, whenever you want to use it. It doesn't have to be posted on Instagram. You don't have to use Facebook. You don't have to do any of those things. Journaling, just your own thoughts. It's just the way to start writing. You know, when you start writing your book, perhaps, maybe your book, I'm sure you went through many iterations of the book in different chapters and you threw stuff away.
It was just one afternoon. It all just was perfect. It
knocked it out.
Yeah, it was the most painless experience I've had in my life.
Yeah. I mean, so getting into that, because you could just create the one piece of content, which could be your book, and that could be it. And then get on some podcasts and talk about it and get your message out there. But you writing a book, like going through that process, and you talked about how you don't like creating content. And I don't know if the book was like, just real quick, like tell us, what was that process like for you? Was it waking up every day at 4:00, locking yourself in a room? Like, what was it?
Oh, I definitely read the books on That's How You Create the Habit.
Yeah.
So for me, the challenge with the book is one of my dreams in my life was to write a book ever since I was about 13. And part of it was at some point, I found myself realizing that my dad would never write a book on his life. And he didn't talk a lot about his life. And me wishing that he had written one so that, and he's still around, but like he's old, written one so I could always like share that with my kids and with other people. And so also I experienced some things when I was younger that were really hard on me and I wanted to be able to share them. Like I had this really terrible experience in 8th grade where a bunch of kids made fun of me for something. And I knew a lot of people been in that situation. And I wanted to be able to share that so other people could be connected to it. And so I always wanted to write a book. And so I had so many starts and stops. And so basically what I found was, do you know the E-Myth by Michael Gerber?
Sure.
So you know how he talks about, I'm probably messing up the terminology, but like there's the tactician, the manager, and like the CEO or the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I start writing, it's really hard I lose sight of the big picture. So basically I wrote like almost 100,000 words, but they were all like, ironically, a guy that's saying he doesn't like content, all like bite-sized, like a page or two. And it occurred to me that I was hiding a weakness, that I couldn't write my own book. And so I started talking to entrepreneurs and they talked about ghostwriters. And so I started interviewing ghostwriters and I didn't like any of them. And there's like these 2 organizations that most entrepreneurs like know about and use, and I didn't want to use them. But I found a guy that does hybrid publishing. He connected me to a ghostwriter that can be anything from a ghostwriter to a co-writer to an editor. And his name is Alan Harris. And he was amazing. And so when I started working with him, I gave him all my content. He's like, you've already written 2 books. You just need to synthesize it. So I started working with him, but I still just gave him the keys. I was like, dude, I'll just talk to you about this content and then like you write it, because I just knew that I had failed. And so I guess I just needed to get over that hump, because what happened was I found myself halfway through the book reading chapter 4 that he had churned out and turning to my wife and saying, I hate my fucking book. I hate it. And so she's like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to go somewhere tomorrow and I'm just going to like try to rewrite this chapter. I spent 3 hours trying to rewrite 2 pages and I realized that I was being inauthentic in writing my book. I had too many facts and figures. I was trying to prove my points because I was insecure that my audience wouldn't take me seriously. And I was also trying to write a book that people would want to read versus the book that I wanted to write. And so essentially what I came to was a complete reset. It cost me money, it cost me time, but we scrapped the book halfway through. We started over. And instead, we started a process where Alan would take the things that I had written and the things that I would say, create a chapter, and I would completely rewrite it. And then my wife and my friend / business partner, Stacy, who helped me build in quicker, who knew what I was trying to teach and as a certified coach, would also give me their edits. Then I would rewrite it again based off of their edits because I trust them to catch my blind spot. And then I would give it back to Alan for editing. And it was an incredibly laborious process because I both had the expense of a ghostwriter without the benefit of like not having to spend the work. And so we went down to a beach house in Florida in December of last year, a house on the beach for 2 weeks. And I think that I was on the beach for 2 hours. I spent 14 to 16 hours a day in a Panera or a Starbucks as part of a Target every single day, while my daughter and my wife would go to the beach. And I basically had to write the book, but I couldn't write it from scratch. That was my problem. And I needed help because I would get lost. And so like that was the process. And the coolest thing about this, I know it's a long story, but at the end of the book, there is a chapter. It's called A Tale of Two Divorces. And it was a chapter that I was too scared to put in the book the first go round. It's about, I wanted to end the book. Most people that like outline a system for you improving your life, like it ends with, you can do it and you can get a Ferrari because I got a Ferrari and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to end the book with the worst year of my life clean, where I put all the masks back on and I stopped doing everything that I taught the people. And so I put in the last chapter in the book, A Tale of Two Divorces, and it's about the year that I started wearing all the masks. I stopped doing everything I tell people, and I had to divorce my business partner, my wife, and sell the business that I loved that I never wanted to sell all in the same year. And it's a cautionary tale for them that you never recover from this shit. You're always in recovery. But I was scared to put it in because it made me look weak, not like the badass entrepreneur or whatever. Like I messed up all these things. And guess what? It's the chapter I'm most proud of. It's the chapter that most people connect with. And it's like, this stuff is not shocking. But dude, it was a journey getting to my authentic book. And I still feel weird saying that I had help writing it because I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be the person that wrote it. But that's how that thing happened, man. It was birthing a child. My wife, as fucked up as 2020 has been, she hated 2019.
Wow. Shit will go bad. And you say that, and it sounds like in anything that you've done, like you're going to go there. Like you went to where your book was, but you didn't go deep, but you hadn't gone there yet.
Yep.
You hadn't gone to where the bad shit lives, and you had to continue to like peel the layers and like, I got to get down there. And maybe you didn't know you were going through this process. And if someone would have told you, this is what you're going to have to do it, you'd be like, I'm not doing that. Right. But you're in it.
Yeah.
And you knew you were going to do it. And you knew there was something on the other end of it. And that's awesome, man. I think it's great. I appreciate the time and the conversation and just these stories. I mean, it's interesting. I hear the thing, like the talent stack, like all these talents that you have. It's wild because you look at it like your addiction is now a talent. Like, go figure. That's some wild stuff.
No one said that before. I like that.
Yeah. It wasn't me. I heard of Scott Adams, who's the Dilbert cartoonist. And so if you go check out his content, there's a lot of political stuff in there.
Yeah.
But you don't have to listen to it for that. If that stuff bothers somebody, there's a lot of persuasion, psychology, philosophy, and talent stacks, right? Like your experiences can become your talents. And you talk about your 10,000 hours of all these different, you've written a book now, you get on podcasts, you're a great speaker, you got a TED Talk. Like you have a way about you that it's just, man, it's people want to be around it. And so I appreciate it. You obviously have your website, michaelbrody-waite.com. Where can people buy the book? Where else can they learn about you? You know, great leaders live like drug addicts. I mean, that's your book title. That's the book title that people are going to pay attention to.
Yeah, they definitely pay attention to it. I've definitely got some love and some hate.
Yeah.
So you can get the book in any of the major retailers, but also if you go to michaelbrody-waite.com, you can take what we've created as a mask assessment. So that's our lead magnet. And then you'll go into an email funnel. Like I like to be upfront about this stuff, but basically the whole goal of the whole thing is to illustrate how you can practice in 1 minute a day, everything that I've been talking about, and how you can find a community that we call the Mask-Free Society full of leaders that are committed to being rigorously authentic. And we help each other stay authentic and support each other and say no to things and share our weaknesses and have difficult conversations and share our unique perspective. And so if you just want to learn about me, you can go to michaelbrody-waite.com. But honestly, like my story is the least important thing. What's more important is your story. And I think that the principles that we put together and the community we put together can help you unleash the power of yours.
Well, thank you, Mike. I've heard you talk to people directly. Like you said, your wife had said it, talk to the one person. And I've heard you do it before. If someone's dealing with something, if they are an addict, like someone like you's there. And there's a lot of people like you out there. And I think a lot of people I appreciate what you do. I appreciate your time, your energy, your stories, your passion, your conviction, your just all of it, man. So thank you.
Dude, thank you. You're a good dude. You ask great questions. You have great insight. And I can tell that you're genuine, which is something that as obvious of a competitive advantage as it creates is in short supply. So it's great to see.
Thank you. One of my favorite things about CADSource is the opportunity to chat with amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or visit us at cadsource.com. Thank you for listening to this CADSource production, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time. This episode exists because of CADSource. CADSource is your content team. You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? That's what we do. Content strategy, creation, and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CADSource, we exist to help you create and share amazing content. And yes, you should have a podcast. We'll help you. Learn more by visiting CADScontent.com.